Hey everyone, welcome back to another exciting episode of Three Simple Men Making Their Way Through the Galaxy. I'm Tom. With me as always, Ryan and Mike. And today we are diving back towards Tales of the Jedi. Guys, what's the episode title? I'm spacing out.
Called the Sith Lord.
Episode 4.
Well, it's called the Sith Lord, ladies and gentlemen, and there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I want to hop right in and just say what struck me the most about this episode is I think it is a perfect episode for the anti-animated crowd, the people that are like, oh, the movies are good, but the cartoons are too childish. There's nothing childish about this episode. This episode is dealing with, obviously grief. Because what we didn't get to do last episode, and I regret it, but we didn't have a moment of silence for the fallen, legendary Qui-Gon Jinn, portrayed by Liam Neeson.
R.I.P. man.
But with that, I mean, this brings us about a quarter of the way into this episode. We get that his former master Dooku dealing with that. We get probably to date, besides the end of Phantom, where we get Qui-Gon's death and Darth Maul's death, we get at least for an animated series, we get a pretty brutal death scene, not once but twice, which we'll get into. But it was dark. It's a very dark episode. It's very the music, everything. It's got a lot of adult themes. But let's start it off with the major plot point that kind of ties in with the future movie. But we get Dooku going to I think, Mike, is this our first appearance of the archives? I think, chronologically.
Ooh,
I believe so.
Where you're going with it.
I know you've had the library as your background a bit, so I wanted to.
The Jedi Council. Yeah, I probably should have switched up to the Council, but yes, this is the first time we're seeing the Jedi archives.
Yeah, so we get the archives. We get not just Dooku, but we also get Master Jocasta, who I like to call the librarian. But right off the bat, Dooku is sneaking in. Clearly, he punches in a different Jedi's codes, Master Sifo Dyas, and he erases the planet Kamino from the archives. So now we actually see what gets alluded to in the future film, but we see that action taking place. We now know who did it, because it was kind of left a little ambiguous, right? We didn't really know who went in and deleted the archives. And again, we'll see this in the future. But yeah, and this is also, I guess, probably the first time full on now, chronologically, that we see Dooku just fully being dark side. Like, I mean, he's doing something. He's just sneaking. He's lying. I think it's pretty obvious. The next scene is Yaddle and Qui-Gon talking, and Yaddle clearly is sensing something. She is acting like something's up with Qui-Gon, with Dooku. But let's so what do you guys think about that before I repeat the entire episode without letting you talk?
Well, I think the first thing we got to go back to is when Dooku goes back and talks to Qui-Gon, and he says, so you told him about an encounter with what you appear to be a Sith Lord or a Sith apprentice, and they didn't believe you, which two things led to happen. Qui-Gon was telling the truth. Dooku believes him, but Dooku also believed in the idea that he's always been skeptical of the idea of that the darkness is rising, and they're just ignoring it with the Sith Lord.
Well, so like Dooku is at this point, like, he knows, right? He knows that Qui-Gon's not lying because he's full on into it, because it already started off with him doing the bidding of Palpatine and erasing the archives. So he's like, aware. Yeah, and I think he's looking at a little. sorry, I think he was looking for a little hook to get into Qui-Gon a little bit and be like, they don't believe you. And luckily Yaddle's there to kind of be like, oh, hold up. They're going slow because they're wise. But it seemed like he was trying to slowly work on luring Qui-Gon maybe towards his goal. Because clearly, he clearly cared about Qui-Gon, which we find out later when he's pretty much yelling at Palpatine or Darth Sidious.
Spoiler alert! But no, but when they go back to the elevator scene, it's pretty much just like Dooku believes Qui-Gon and Dooku wants to help Qui-Gon. And he says, I wish, I can help you out even more. But Qui-Gon says, Obi-Wan helps fill that void. And Dooku acknowledges that Qui-Gon praises Obi-Wan so much. Like he's the golden boy and stuff like that. And we're going to see that interaction later on. If you know, you're gonna know what I'm talking about. If you don't, just give it some time.
Yeah,
it's such a weird time going on. It's pretty much like certain people believe one thing, certain other people believe the other thing. It's just like, what the hell's fucking going on? Pardon my language, but because once Darth Maul made his appearance, it's got the whole Jedi in scramble mode.
Yeah, it's funny because like when you just see like Dooku going about, it's like, oh, what's the fuss about? And then he brings up Qui-Gon, and then like I forget what Jocasta was saying, but one of the things that Dooku was saying was that, oh, it's a quality valued less and less in these great halls. So he's just
Imagination. Imagination. That's she says.
Imagination.
She says Qui-Gon's always had such an active imagination, and so have you, Dooku. And
I've been told that my whole entire life.
That's when he says, Mike, what you just said, that used to be something that was valued, or it's something that seems to be valued less and less in these halls.
Yeah, you just tell after not getting, not being named on the council in the last episode, you could just tell, it's just at this point he's just he's
bitter
down the dark path, and he's just not what he used to be when we first saw, the first episode with Dooku and Tales of the Jedi. Now we're just seeing that progress more and more. And to your point, Ryan, yeah, he's kind of like, playing like two sides to this, like, yeah, what's going on here, but also trying to be that inside man for Sidious.
Find
out, what can he relay back to him. But one of the things that was very interesting to me, like right before like the Tales of the Jedi logo popped up, you just see them going different ways. So you see Yaddle going towards the light side of the hallway, and then Dooku going towards the dark side of the hallway. So I thought that was pretty cool.
We see a little foreshadowing later on in one specific scene, but we won't talk about that.
So credits.
Well pointed, Mike.
Credits drop, or the opening title drops, and then we get a little time jump. Obviously, we see another establishing shot of the Jedi Temple, which we get twice, which I kind of liked. And then it goes into the courtyard with the tree, which is interesting because it was apparently fall on Coruscant, because the leaves were dying, they were falling to the ground, much like Qui-Gon had just done. Maybe a little symbolism there. We get Dooku, mourning to an extent, and Yaddle coming to maybe comfort him, I guess. So we should have touched upon briefly that right at the end, before they walk down that hallway before the opening title, Yaddle asks, I don't think I wrote it down, but she asks Dooku, what's troubling you? Because she senses something, and he pushes it off as like, oh, they grow up so quick. But we know that what's troubling him is he knows he's sending Qui-Gon off to fight basically to his death. I mean, which is what it ends up, but he's sending him off to go encounter this
That's very true.
You know, he's kind of a scum. He's a scumbag. Like, you know, and then so then we cut and Yaddle. So either she's, you know, is she just there to comfort him, or is she kind of, which we then see immediately the next shot, she's like tailing him. But she talks to him at the tree. One little thing I picked up that we learn, Dooku points out that, or lets us know that Qui-Gon was born on Coruscant.
I wrote that down. I was gonna say something.
Yeah.
That we finally know, you know, because you know, going off the script, you know, when we talk about how like during like comedy shows on like Cartoon Network, not Cartoon Network, or like Comedy Central, like the Daily Show, it's like, oh, where's Obi-Wan born? And they say it's like, oh, he was born on Stew John and things like that. I wrote that down because that's very interesting. We never knew where Qui-Gon was born at all. This is the first mention of it.
Yep, and as far as I know, the only mention of it too. Well, actually, this is so. What's
Fair
interesting
enough.
to point out too, you know, the earlier Tales of the Jedi episodes was giving us prequels of, you know, information we didn't know. This takes place after Phantom, so this is like our first.
He's concurrent with Phantom, yeah.
Our first like jump around chronologically between things. But so it's interesting that we're getting more information on Qui-Gon after, because we, besides maybe one more future voice appearance, we don't get any more Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon's dead. So like this is pretty much it of Qui-Gon's story, and you know, we haven't gotten any more from him in the movies for the most part, or the other shows. But we get this, you know, this encounter now. So we get Yaddle tails Dooku in these cool little one-person ships. And then she spies on him, and the big reveal happens. Where we learn, you know, Palpatine, basically they spill everything, and Yaddle overhears it and then chooses to encounter them. Again, I got to go back to the fact that like Dooku like is blaming the council and everything for not believing in Qui-Gon, but like he could have literally stepped in at any time and been like, yo. And Yaddle even says, she's like, I heard it, you're fine, let's, you know, we found him, like you have an opportunity here still. She didn't give up on Qui-Gon, on Dooku, sorry. She was like, you can still make this right. And he was just, you know, he didn't.
But that's where I want to go back a little bit. It's pretty much back to that tree. And it's a quote that stuck with me the most of that scene. It's pretty much like Dooku pretty much tells Yaddle, Qui-Gon is one with the Force, so it's time to let him go. So he let go of the loss of his Padawan, which I think, in a way, he also let go of the ways of the Jedi.
You know what? Yeah, I definitely feel like Yaddle picked up on something there too. So maybe she was a little suspicious, but it was the way he kind of just said that, where she was like, "What the?" And that's when I think she
like
decided,
pretending
like, where is he going? Like, yeah, it seemed. I think
because
you're
he was
right.
just trying to brush it off, like, oh, me being there is just gonna make things awkward, or I forget how he phrased it, but it's just like, yeah, I don't think my presence there would be warranted, and just
Or welcome.
yeah, I think that was the ultimate tip off. I agree, and it just I think this is the first time too that we see like an opening of the Jedi Temple, because you just see the Jedi Temple itself, and then you see when the pillars open up from the landing platform, chronologically speaking, and then you have the two ships going off into like the old industrial part of Coruscant that's abandoned. So we see a different side of Coruscant versus all the nice skyscrapers, the Senate building, the Jedi Council building. So we're in a different part of Coruscant now. So now we'll get into the duel.
The ultimate act.
So right before the duel, to echo what Mike said earlier, we do get this shot of Palpatine, Sidious in the dark shadows to the right, and we got Yaddle in the light to the left, and Dooku at that moment is kind of right in the middle. And this is the first time we actually get chronologically that discussion. Like if you notice, like you know, if you recall in Phantom, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan encounter Maul, and they just go, "We're gonna fight." Like there's no like, think about like there's no discussion with them. They don't talk to him, right? They don't say like, "Think about what you're doing." Like you know, they don't try to bring him to the light. They don't do any of that. They just go, "All right, time to fight." But in this, you get that discussion, and something that we know Sidious / Palpatine is a fan of doing, is trying to bring people into the dark side, and we have Yaddle there trying to pull him to the light and giving him every opportunity. I
Which
mean,
kind of leads me into my hot take. We'll get into that maybe a little bit later, but continue, please.
no, hop into it now. Why not?
Yeah, go for
Okay,
it.
so when we go into that conversation, and then with Yaddle being there, Sidious goes, "I feel betrayed." My question is, or my hot take was, Sidious never truly cared about Dooku, about doing what they wanted, because the Sith are about power and their objectives. But my hot take is like he's never really truly cared about Dooku. He never truly cared about Maul. He never truly cared about anything. But his I think the hot take is all he does is just manipulate people into the way of like, hey, listen, because you saw that duel and the way it ends, which we'll keep talking about, and you just hear him and Dooku is just, because of how how disdained he is with the council, for some reason mentally it just dawns upon him like, I must obey.
Yeah, and like anytime like Dooku was furious about it, Sidious is always saying like, "Oh, it's a necessary sacrifice for the greater, for the end game, which is essentially take over the entire Republic and take over the galaxy." So like anytime like Dooku would bring something up, it's like all that, or you're just like, well, this is what has to happen. It's a small sacrifice for the big thing, and then also, one of the things that caught my eye was just like, just the whole treachery is like, oh, you don't trust me? It's like never. And it just kind of harkens back to like a quote that um Palpatine was saying in episode, or I'm jumping ahead on this one, but he says like all who gain power are afraid to lose it. So obviously, like he doesn't, and you would think with the rule of two, you would want to trust your apprentice, but yeah, it just Tom, what you were saying earlier is just everyone's a pawn to Sidious.
He's the ultimate puppet master. I mean, plain and simple. And I think it's, we've seen him use the Trade Federation because they were upset about taxes that he probably levied against them, so he manipulated them to get what he wanted. He manipulated, Padme to get what he wanted. And I think in this, our earlier Tales of the Jedi episodes show us that Dooku, originally he was just, distrustful. He was aggravated by the Jedi Council and how it, kind of became lazy, right? The Jedi Council, they just did what the Senate said. They dragged their feet like the Senate, specifically with this, like Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan come back and they're like, there's a guy that we're pretty sure is a Sith, and like we need to do something, and they're like, nah, go figure it out on your own. Like, they don't send, which you would think that the ultimate villain in your story and historically, like, be like, oh, we got Sith, let's send like 8 Jedi to go, or even more. Let's send everyone. Let's go figure this out.
That's kind of
So
funny
he
that you brought
definitely,
that up.
yeah,
Because about infiltration, because if you think about it, it's like, as we know, but he's finding a way to infiltrate the Trade Federation to lead the events of the Phantom Menace. He infiltrating policies that are just going to create more chaos. And now we're at the point where it's like, Sidious's plan is, I'm not trying to lure a Jedi into a. This could be a part 2 hot take. I'm not trying to lure a Jedi into the dark side. I'm just trying to infiltrate the Jedi in the way they think and the way they act.
I mean, he seeded distrust, and I mean, I'm gonna go right into my quote. Yaddle throws it at Dooku during the battle, and you know when she, I think she looks up at her ship, and Dooku says, "What are you running back to the council?" And she says, "It is you who has run Dooku into the arms of evil." And that's literally what it was. Like, he was upset, but absolutely manipulated, and we see that, you know, in the future, which I won't get into, but how manipulated he truly is by Palpatine. And I mean, and you know, to talk about Maul, like, you know, we have Qui-Gon we have Sidious who shows up, and oh man, not Sidious, Dooku shows up to talk to Sidious, and he confronts him, and you know, he's like, well, you know, killing Qui-Gon was too far. Like, why would you do that? He would have joined us. And you know, Palpatine's just like, I lost a Padawan too. No big deal. Sacrifices are necessary. Like, he just throws Maul and moves on. And we know in Clone Wars, like, and he continues to move on. He goes through Padawans like Anakin goes through lightsabers, and you know, it's just constant. And it's like, you know,
the way Sidious looked at it is like, at that scene, it's pretty much like, you lost an apprentice, I lost a master, an eye for an eye. Do you want to get this shit done? Part of my language again. But
hey, you're the one who's gonna have to edit it all out. So
we'll leave it all in. But no, it's pretty much like, it was pretty much like the ultimate sacrifice for them. Is pretty much like, listen, I lost Maul, you lost your master. But if you really believe in what I'm saying and how the Jedi are just not truly who they are, then you have to accept that fate. You have to accept.
What was Maul his master? No.
Dooku was the master of Qui-Gon. Maul was the apprentice of Sidious.
Yeah, so they both lost.
Yeah.
So
they both lost apprentices.
Yeah. I think there are some references to Master, but we'll just move on with that. But yeah,
I think a lot to edit.
I mean, I feel bad for Yaddle, because just like, obviously she's the one who's trying to like pull him back. You know, it's okay. You know, you're here. We can bring in the Sith Lord. We can end the Sith altogether. And then at one point she says, "I'm on your side, Dooku. I stepped down from my position on the council." And you were right about so many things. They should have listened. Qui-Gon didn't have to die. And I think that was the point where you just see Dooku just going full savage mode and just unleashing strike after strike. Because I think it was like the first time they ignite lightsabers to fight each other. I mean, you didn't really see some of that, but like once like Yaddle had that talk, you saw Dooku just moving the ship aside and just full on just like attack nonstop. He did not, like, he was on the full offensive, and then he used the Force to bring down the door on Yaddle. And
yeah, which that's when I mentioned that there were 2 deaths. So like, Yaddle dies right there in my mind. I was watching it and I watched this a while ago. This is only my second time watching this, as opposed to like the movies and stuff. And when that door came down, I was like, oh my, it's like, what? You should see what I wrote. I was like, what a death scene. Ugh. Yaddle just got crushed like a bug, like gruesome. And then of course we get this awesome moment where, and interrupt me if I'm going too fast, but where Yaddle then uses the Force, the light comes back in, she manages to take the door off of herself and says, you know, maybe another line when she falls down, and then we get yet another vicious murder from Dooku.
Yeah, and just like when she's trying to bring up the door, like, you would all think of like, there are so many things out there that would stop a Sith Lord, but you saw like Palpatine like trying to get back into the dark, trying to cover his face to not reveal who he actually is. So it was just like, you had that moment, and then, you know, she gave, you know, between the door hitting her and, you know, she didn't have much left to keep it up with the Force, and you just saw her fall in, door closes, and it just all becomes darkness. But yeah, going to what you said, Ryan, too, like Dooku was like I want only to bring peace and order to the galaxy, and Yaddle comes back to like, well, who, who died so you could have that, and then he just closes it and just says, "Let me give you your peace," and then murders her.
Yeah. Viciously, unarmed, like just defenseless, weak, lying on the ground, just freaking strikes her down.
That's what Dooku pretty much had to, just like he's gone too far, and to trail down towards the dark side path. There was no other way, but just
I think the next shot was Palpatine, Sidious with a big smile on his face right afterwards, which, interesting thing that I didn't think about until just now too, which we won't see. Trying to think if it happens at any other time before New Hope, but where we get a Jedi that dies and immediately the body vanishes, where they become one with the Force. Remember, I know in the future we'll see that with Obi-Wan, and then we see it with Yoda, but I don't know if we see it any other time, which is interesting that it didn't happen with Qui-Gon. I know, spoilers, but I found that interesting, that we don't get it yet. You would think like Yaddle, on the Jedi Council, but again, I guess at the end maybe she was questioning things. Who knows? Maybe it comes down to training or whatnot. Just interesting thing I kind of thought of what that means. Any other anything else, boys? I mean, it was kind of a short episode.
It was. I think it was just under 20 minutes. I will say like, different. Definitely. I mean, this is the first time we've seen Yaddle or someone of Yoda's species, so definitely a stark contrast. You have Yaddle speaking in complete sentences versus Yoda, who speaks the way that he does. So it's definitely a different contrast with that. I don't think we know how old she is at this point of the movie, but she is voiced by Bryce Dallas Howard. And for those of you who don't know,
that's a good deep dive right there.
That's a good deep dive yet again.
Very popular with the Mandalorian. She's been producing a lot of episodes, and she's been working a lot with Dave Filoni. And
her father is Ron Howard.
Let's go.
Old time friends with George Lucas. One of George Lucas's other films, I believe, was American Graffiti, starring Ron Howard. I think that was a George Lucas film. It could have been a Spielberg, but I'm pretty sure it's George Lucas. So definitely, yes, of course, he was on the Andy Griffith Show too. But the connection, I mean, Dallas Howard is an individual that definitely grew up with Star Wars in her life, and has been part of the Star Wars family or extended family probably before even getting involved in Star Wars. So that's awesome. I did not know that she did a lot.
Like you said, man, she's been awesome.
Like
I loved her directorial
around, but for people who really want to watch behind the scenes, like definitely watch The Mandalorian on Disney Plus, because it really dives into each of these different directors. So and it also zeroes in at Bryce Dallas Howard, so you get that perspective, like Ryan and Tom have been talking about, just seeing like how what Star Wars means to her and how she's been able to put her interpretation or creativity on on the animated screen or on the big screen now with all the Disney Plus series. So there's definitely a nice Easter egg in there. And definitely a sad way for Yaddle die, because we don't even, like, before like this happened, like we don't even know how Yaddle stepped down from the council, or whether she moved on or died. But now we get that here's what happened, sort of a thing. So overall, very sad, but it's what Ryan mentioned at the beginning, definitely a very darker tone, and something not PG or G rated. So
no, and again, for those skeptics that say, oh, it's a cartoon, again, you watch this and tell me that this is a childish episode, and the themes are there, dark side, light side, whether you're a Star Wars fan or not. The terms dark side and light side have become part of the lexicon, you know, like dark being evil, light being good. It shows its way in not just the Star Wars world, but in so many other things. You know, embrace your dark side, or this person has a dark side. It's not even a Star Wars reference anymore. And this episode really touches on those themes. And you know, it's just that inner, right, the inner battle that everyone has, good versus evil, and they portray it very well in this episode.
And this is the last time that we are going to see Count Dooku with a blue lightsaber.
True.
Pretty true.
And with not gray hair.
But I'm kind of curious, like, have we ever seen the process of like a Jedi turning their lightsaber red? I don't think we've ever seen that before.
It happens in the comics, but you got to read the comics because Darth Vader does manage to turn the kyber crystal red, but it's in the comic book. But
Yep.
who knows?
We might get it in the future.
Possibly.
Who knows? You know, honest to God, you know. But that being said, I have nothing left to say, guys. Anyone else?
No, I mean, where are we heading off to next? Are we gonna start episode 2, Attack of the Clones, next week for the group?
Is that
where we
what's
are?
next? Or
Chronologically?
somebody look at, or chronologically, do we have another? How many more Tales of the Jedi? Or was this the last Tales of the Jedi episode?
I think we've got 2 more because I think now it jumps back into
But there's Ahsoka, right?
So not
There's
sure
a
how
lot going on.
I guess we're going back into another movie, which is fun.
Yes. That being said, thank you for watching, everyone. Also, by the way, if you guys like us, check us out on Instagram. Ryan, what is the Instagram handle?
3 Simple Men. That's it.
That's
We'll put it. I'll send it to you. You can maybe link it on the YouTube channel. But with that, let's you know, take us out, Mike.
All right, that's a wrap. Thank you, everyone, for joining 3 Simple Men making their way through the galaxy. Hit that like, comment, and subscribe, and come back next week for some Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones content. May the Force be with you, always.